Working with older film stocks, each decade and manufacturer has its own look and problems. So, for instance, with Peeping Tom, we're talking about color negative from the 60s, which fortunately that decade was a good decade for Kodak. The 50s, the negatives faded horribly. The 60s, the dyes are actually quite stable. So 60s films print up nicely. The problem is we don't have 1960s print stock, and all print stock from the 60s is horribly faded. So you have to know what print stock from that era should have looked like, and then take a print on contemporary print stock and extrapolate how it should have looked.
How exciting. When I came in, were you looking at some films?
Yes.
Of yours?
Yes.
I'd like to see them. Oh, I know I'm being rude, but I really would like to see them.
I love when things come around that I have an affection for. I saw Peeping Tom in college as part of just the running film festival many, many years ago. And I thought it was really an interesting film, kind of, ahead of its time. And so when those things come through here, it's very exciting.
Sit down.
Oh, but this all seems so terribly technical. If this is where you work, I can't wait to see what you work at.
Restoring films in 4K. 4K, really, you're scanning from the original negative. You're really capturing pretty much all the sharpness of the original negative. And the prints you would have seen in the theater didn't look like that. It would have been a few generations removed from the original negative. So then you have to start saying, do we need to reproduce the grain structure of the negative or the grain structure of a print as you would have seen it in the theater?
So that source was original negative, but we did not scan it here. Most titles we scan on premises, but for Peeping Tom, the original negative I think was scanned in Britain.
The scan of Peeping Tom was done at Silver Salt in London. They're kind of a London equivalent to us because the client didn't want to take the risk of shipping the original negative over the ocean. When a film comes into Cineric, it goes through a bunch of little departments. That gets checked in. Somebody goes through the negative, makes sure it's the film we need. If there's other elements, checks them out, measures them, makes sure they're the right running length. Then the film gets cleaned, it gets scanned, then it goes into restoration. From the restored files, then go to grading. Then that graded file goes to the client, gets reviewed, come back. We render a bunch of deliverables. Those go through a quality control process. And then finally they get delivered to the client.
This is so many things, but above all, it's so completely unexpected.
Layout would be first, then scanning, and then it comes to me. And then I would look it over and decide next steps. We have a pretty standard kind of approach for all jobs that gets tailored depending on a particular job and really the quality of the element that is coming in. I mean, if we're working with original negative, that's the ideal. And then if you're working with dupes and prints, they tend to have more problems that require further solutions. But really there's a kind of a standard workflow that we follow, which is removing the dirt first and the scratches. And that's kind of a mix of automated and manual processes. And then I tend to do the stabilization, removing flicker, fixing tears or rips, removing gate hairs, stuff like that. A lot of times there's just jitter in the image because you're not working from the original negative, or the original negative was very tricky to scan for some reason, so that the only way we could capture it was a little bit of movement in it that I will then remove, or because the negative is not there when they made maybe the dupe negative or the print, which is now the best element to go from. That process on the optical bench or whatever was not an exact science, so maybe some movement got photographed into it, and so we want to make it more stable and viewable. Not artificially so. I mean, film has some life to it and a little bit of, organic movement. So we're careful not to go too far.
this all yours?
Yes.
I mean, did you do all this?
The original negative of Peeping Tom was in quite good condition, apart from a couple reels that had some scratches and intermittent digs. But luckily we were able to, Silver Salt was able to wetgate those reels that hides scratches and surface defects, and that solved most of the problems.
Original negative always makes me happy. There was the standard amount of kind of dirt, scratches, sometimes a lot of instability, but we were able to stabilize using the perforations in some reels, and that worked pretty well. Needed some touch-ups. In a few of the reels, there was sort of some process streaking that had kind of come in on the right hand side that would then sort of curtain in and off. That was very scary, but thankfully wetgate scanning took care of a lot of that. And then, there are sections that are opticals where you have to transition from a original negative to optical, and you want to smooth that transition out. The optical sections look a lot rougher than the original negative sections, so we try and maybe sharpen those up a little bit and try and match them a little bit. I mean, there are a lot of interesting shots where he's looking through the camera, and there's kind of an inherent blurriness to them, where maybe at first glance you might be like, oh, should I sharpen this up a little bit? But no, I think, you'd probably just leave it as it is.
Now what are you doing?
Photographing you, photographing me.
Oh, Mark, you're brilliant.
Generally what happens is with a classic title, one important element is there any reference material that would help me understand the look that was meant by the director in the day. Most of the time the directors are no longer available. So I will look for either a print is the best source. If there's a historic print that's available that may have withstood, or there might have been a restoration done maybe 20 years ago, a film restoration, which is a little different than digital. And the director might have been around to have some input on that. So if there's an element that I can screen in here and use as a reference that's film-based, that's always preferred. The challenge for grading Peeping Tom is that it's an extremely carefully lit film, and colors are very intentional. And Michael Powell used a very wide palette. So he definitely had an intent of the emotional meaning of the film. Reds are very prominent, as well as all the primaries, but red particularly is prominent in it. He uses it in a very particular way to make it kind of a little, kind of very, I'm going to use the word garish, but that's a little bit kind of what I think the intent was. Lighting and color was there right from the beginning. It was intended. So, and that just makes it a little challenging. You want to make sure you don't go past the amount that was meant to be there. So that's where the print is very helpful. So my workflow for grading almost any job is to first, on my own, go through it and come up with a primary grade, which is basically a fairly sterile grade. Basically just using what the image is kind of naturally set for. And that's where the print comes in, or any references that might be important. The idea is to not go too far beyond until my client comes in. In this case, Thelma Schoonmaker, the widow of Michael Powell. It was her husband's film. So Thelma is very intimately aware of the intent and her husband's material. So Thelma sat with me, and we then kind of get into that next level of grading, which is now experimenting more with how far we want to go with the color, the density, the contrast. I wait for that stage until I get some feedback from the customer, or the person who is going to give me their emotional feeling for the film, right? Being the director's not here, Thelma was very important in that. She knew kind of very instinctively of how it should be. It's a collaborative kind of situation, certainly back and forth, until we find the right place where we're happy with it.
Instinct's a wonderful thing, isn't it, Mark?
A pity it can't be photographed.
I would say probably, there are maybe 5 or 6 key scenes where the drama is very high and the colors are very intentional. With Peeping Tom, one is the dark room where he does his own processing of black and white film. So there is a safe light in there. We call a safe light, a red light for that, and it's used very dramatically in the film. It's meant not only as for the processing of the film, but it's also meant to show his emotional connection to the film and what he's doing with it. So it has a very vivid sense to it. So that was a bit challenging. To hit that right was really crucial.
Mark, what are you doing?
Wanted to photograph you watching.
No.
So that's very important. And there's also some of the sets where take place where he commits his crimes, or he commits these murders in the film. They're lit in a very particular way. Matter of fact, he kind of lights them himself, one in particular. So there's a lot of key lights going on, a lot of different colors. So these were very important to keep as kind of pure as possible, but you can, of course, extend them further if you want to. And that was very important, to get input from Thelma on how far to go with that.
Aged 5.
The sound of Peeping Tom was restored at the BFI. They got the original sound elements, recorded them, did the restoration, and generally we have a Lisbon office. We do more audio restoration, but generally people either specialize in the image or the sound, especially in the US, is one or the other.
The biggest challenge of Peeping Tom is, I think, not to make it too nice, actually, because there's kind of a lurid quality to the film. Seedy? I don't know what to say. Yeah, you don't want to go too pristine with this thing. I'll still take out all the dirt, but you don't want to make that thing too perfect.
I think what I'm hoping we captured in our restoration was to adhere closer to the director's intent. And the director not being here, that of course leaves a lot of responsibility on me and on the person, in this case Thelma, that is bringing that voice of the director to the case. And I'm hoping that we were able to achieve that, to somehow get Michael Powell's voice and what he artistically meant this to be closer, and that's always it's always a challenge. You hope you meet it as close as possible.